So this is a book that came out a number of years ago. And if you're in a lot of my classes, one of the things you're going to know, especially if you look over my shoulder, that's just one wall of the bookcase. And then there's over on the other side, and then there's about 1,000 in here. And so there's a lot of different references that I try to bring to you, a lot of different materials. Normally what we do in Script and Language Lab is we teach an idea and then go into breakout rooms to practice it. One of the things that, while I do believe it's important to kind of learn scripts and learn the language, I think it's really important to kind of learn the linguistic rules so that you can improvise. It's one thing to memorize script, and there's a role for memorizing script. But there's another thing. You know, when I was an undergraduate, I was a music major until I realized that I couldn't feed my family as a music major. So I became a social worker, and my father's like, "Oh, what are you thinking?" Right? So one of the things that I learned as a music major is, you know, when I was around the classical musicians, they learned performance. They learned how to play what was on the paper note perfectly, and they could interpret it. But the jazz musicians I found them really fascinating, because what they learned was not only the scales and how to play their instrument, but they learned rules of how they could perform with each other. When you do this, it frees me up to have these things that I can do. When I do this, it frees you up to do these kinds of things. And what Script and Language Lab, more than anything else, is about teaching some of the linguistic rules so that you can have natural conversations of your own doing, kind of in an improvisational way that are more impactful. And so we've been doing this now for several different months, kind of teaching these rules, going into Zoom rooms and practicing the different rules as we go. What we're going to do today is different. I'm going to just touch on some of the things that Phil talks about in his book. A couple of the key magic phrases. There's probably about 17, 18 of them in his book. We're going to talk about 8 of them today. And rather than go into breakout rooms and practice for a while, what I'm really looking for in participation is, as we introduce the rules or the phrases, I'm going to love for you guys to start to think about, how would I use this phrase in a real estate related conversation? And so these are magic words. They're not this kind of magic. I don't have the ability to kind of give you any special incantations. I wish I did, because I can promise you your life would be a heck of a lot easier if you could just take a magic spell and get things done that way. But what we're going to talk about today is, how does this language work? Why does it work? And I'm going to ask you guys, before we move on to the next rule, just to start to think about how you would incorporate that in a real estate related conversation. Sound good? We all kind of get a sense of what we're doing here? And so Susie says in chat, she's looked up the book that we're basing it on. Yeah, it's a good one. Go ahead and get it. It's a really good book. So, all right, we just talked about that. Rule number 1. Here's the magic phrase number 1. And I think there was a time back when we were doing the Zoom calls with Al Donahue. Remember when we were doing those in the beginning of COVID? I think there was a time where Stacey Esther actually did do one of those Zooms. And I remember her citing this particular phrase as one that she uses sometimes with buyers and sellers. And the phrase is simply this: I'm not sure if this is for you, but. I'm not sure if this is for you, but. And, you know, why does this work? Well, what this phrase does is it introduces an idea in a pressure-filled environment. You know, one of the things you've heard me say, if you've been in scripts class before, or really any classes with me before, one of the things you've heard me say a lot is that a lot of people have a lot of biases about real estate agents. Quick show of hands for those of you who are cameras open. And if you can be cameras open, it's always better to be cameras open in a class than cameras closed. If you have to be cameras closed, I get it. If you have kids at home, whatever. But what are some of the biases that people have about salespeople in general and real estate agents specifically? Anybody want to unmute and sort of throw some of your favorite, most common things that you think they think about us stereotypically?
They're pushy.
We're pushy. What else?
We're like used car salesmen.
Used car salesman. I love that one. What else?
We're trying to get over on them.
We're trying to get over on them. I had somebody actually say bloodsuckers the last time I asked this question. I'm like, ooh,
Lovely.
That's a little graphic. But here's the perception. The perception is we're pushy, we're manipulative. We're going to do whatever it takes to close the sale, regardless of if it's in their best interest or not. And they don't like us, right? And that is just one of the realities, is that we have to kind of overcome some of that. And I'm not sure if this is for you, but introduces an idea and says no pressure, right? No pressure. The second thing it does is it kind of increases their intrigue, their curiosity. I'm not sure if this is for you, but how do you think that would create curiosity in the other person? How would that create curiosity?
They're open-minded to listening to your suggestions. Their guards down.
Okay, we're going to talk about being open-minded in a minute, for sure.
Yeah,
How else does this increase their curiosity?
because they're going to wait and see what follows the word but. So now they're like, huh.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is for you, but hold up. I'll be the one who decides if it's for me or not. And it actually
Exactly. They get to have the power then.
gives them the power. Guys,
Yeah.
one of the things that we learn in really taking scripts to the high level, and we've taught in the Script and Language Lab, is the things that we can do, especially with strangers, to overcome the sense of salesperson resistance is to empower them. Right? If you go back to Social Psychology 101, Abraham Maslow, Hierarchy of Human Needs, once we get basic human needs like food, shelter, water, sleep met, the next basic human need that people have to have is the feeling that they have some control over their environment. And by getting them to be the ones who sort of make that decision, by empowering them to make the decision for themselves, they feel more in control themselves. They feel less resistant to us, right? And so we have lots of different things that we've talked about in Script and Language Lab on how to do that. No pressure, increases their intrigue, their curiosity. The power of the word but, right? Remember when we were kids, Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday mornings, conjunction, junction, what's your function? I can't be the only one who remembers this.
Hooking
Of
up.
course.
And, button, or, they'll get you really far. The word but is a really powerful word because it negates everything that you said in front of it. Hal, I really like that shirt, but leads me to believe that whatever else you said, you don't really like my shirt. Now, what's not to like about this shirt? This is Keller Williams. It's the purple shirt, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, I'm not sure if this is for you, and then saying the word but. And what happens is in their unconscious, it negates, I'm not sure if this is for you. It causes them to hear, this is probably for you. So how would you use that? How would you use that magic phrase in a real estate related context? Anybody want to take a crack at how you could insert that?
I'm not sure this is for you, but I've got a great house for you to develop for a flipper. I've been using that with somebody who flips houses, and it works. She's interested.
I'm not sure if it's for you, but I have this great opportunity, right? Love it. Who else wants to take a shot?
Sorry.
I'm not sure if this is for you, but I'll make it easy. I just put up on the board here one. I'm not sure if this is right for you, but who do you know that's interested in selling a house right now? You know, one of the things that makes circle prospecting so hard to do is we know that the likelihood that somebody needs our service the moment we reach out to them is infinitesimally small. And so we don't want to be that guy who's annoying. And so we don't make these calls because I don't want to bother people. And what we remember and what we learn is that, guys, sales is, we are professional interrupters. We have to interrupt people. That's what sales is. If you're not comfortable interrupting people, you're not going to succeed in sales. However, we've got to interrupt people with something that feels like it's meaningful and powerful to them. And we know if we're just circle calling, with the average person moving once every 10 years, the likelihood that today's your day is really small. And in that off chance that we do catch them on that day, what tends to happen is we panic. I've seen this a million times, not a million, but enough times to see. They're making the call. Have you thought about, I know this might not be right for you, but have you thought about selling your home? And they go, actually, we were thinking about that today. Funny you called today. And the person goes, wait, what? And slams the phone down because they didn't know what to say in that moment, right? I'm not sure if this is right for you, but who do you know that's interested in selling a home? No pressure. It might not be right for you. It could be right for somebody else. It might not be right for you, but meaning it negates that, and it could be right for you. There's a million places where you can use this one if you put it into your bag of tricks. as a way of just introducing an idea and minimizing resistance. Allison, do you want to unmute and share what you said in chat there? Because I think you had a really good point.
Oh, so literally every single phrase or magic word in this book Stacy uses in the real estate world and outside of the real estate world in every language and every conversation. And since she has been instilling that in us, I've been finding myself even doing that with my own family members.
I'm not sure if this is right for you.
Yeah, sure. Would you be open-minded to doing your homework? Yeah. Would you be open-minded to doing your homework now?
All right. Let's move on to the second one. I've got 8 of them I want to share with you in the time we have today. And it's interesting because the number 2 one is the one that Allison just talked about. How open-minded are you? Now, why do you think this one could be a magic word? How open-minded are you? I'd love to hear from somebody who hasn't participated yet. Why do you think this could be a magic word? How open-minded are you? How does that break down resistance or get people into alignment?
Because you're taking the pressure away from and forcing a hard question on them and leaving it up to them to really delve a little deeper within themselves.
Back into that, they're in control. They get to decide. Right? Super important to do that with people that we're meeting for the first time, where we've got all this inherent, I don't like salespeople, relationship bias. Less important when we're talking to somebody who we've got rapport with, to be honest. But certainly they're in control. What else? How else could this be a magic word? Do you like to
nobody wants to be closed-minded.
Nobody wants to see themselves as closed-minded. Here's a couple things that we know about adults. They like to, whether they are or not, they like to see themselves as open-minded. They like to see themselves as fair. And so magic phrases that sort of ask them to see themselves through that lens. Here's another magic phrase that's not in his book, but one I use all the time. I say whatever I want to say, and I follow it up with, does that sound fair? Because does that sound fair is an easy place for people to get buy-in. You know, John, 1 of 3 things is going to happen tonight. You're going to choose to list your home with me. You might not choose to list your home with me. And if I decide we're not a good fit, if I decide there's someone whose skills might be better able to serve your needs, if we're not a good fit, I might refer you to somebody else. Does that sound fair? Right? Does that sound fair is another one. But here's the deal. This one, people want to see themselves as open-minded. The choice is actually stacked in the favor of the choice that we want them to make. How open-minded are you about, and then you kind of fill in the blank with the statement that you want them to make. So it could sound something like this. How open-minded would you be about meeting for 20 minutes to discuss that? You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. for sale by owner? I can appreciate the fact that you want to sell your house by yourself. Commission's a lot of money. How open-minded would you be about meeting for just 15 minutes to talk about all your options? How else could you use this phrase in a real estate related context? Anybody? I got 29 of the smartest people in the company on this Zoom right now. Somebody else take a shot. And this is why we call this a lab, because in a lab we experiment with stuff. We take a shot, and if it doesn't work, we modify it and we try it again. Come on, guys. I know somebody else can come up with one. How open-minded would you be about what? What would you ask someone to do that they might be a little closed-minded about?
About the price the listing price.
All right. Let's talk about that. Let's use this now. Let's experiment. And guys, you can help her out. How would you use this phrase? How open-minded would you be in a pricing conversation?
About lowering the price that you feel your house is worth, maybe?
All right. Anybody else want to take a shot at giving about how open-minded we would be in a pricing context?
I would probably say, how open-minded would you be about bringing your price down to market value? Like if they overpriced their house?
Right. Because when we start with, if we just start with, will you bring your price down to market value? We're going to get pushback. How open-minded would you be about that when people want to perceive themselves as open-minded players, right? How open-minded would you, if we're going to stack it, we could really use it something like this. How open-minded would you be about doing the right thing and getting this priced at market value? Right? Powerful language, but how open-minded would you be about that? Kind of greases the skids. I see something in chat. Maybe we have, how open-minded would you be to disclose the defects of your home? I see that in chat, right? Let's hope they don't have to be open-minded, because that is a requirement by state law. How open-minded would you be about following the law? But you're going to find that there's certain times where how open-minded would you be is a great tool to have in your bag of tricks. Let's go on to number 3. If I can, will you? Let's talk about this. How does this become? If I can, will you? What is this used for? Well, for starters, it's one that we use when we've isolated a condition that needs to be solved. Now, before we get into conditions, what's the difference between a condition and an objection? Because they're different. If you've been in the script and language lab, we've talked about this before, but what's the big difference between an objection and a condition?
A condition is something that you can't really necessarily change, like I have to wait till my kids get out of school.
Right. The condition is something that is a barrier, that's something that's a problem to be solved. And if we can solve the problem, that barrier goes away. Whereas an objection, what's an objection? An objection is resistance to move forward, generally based in fear. And our job is to engage, to explore the fear with them, and then to put together a different solution, right? That's basic 30,000 foot view objection handling 101. But when we've got a condition, is anybody experiencing in this market today any conditions that are delaying bringing a house on the market because something has to happen first? Or conditions that are delaying putting an offer in? Let's think COVID. Any COVID-related market conditions that could slow down the process one way or the other?
Well, yeah, people don't know where they're going to go.
Gloves.
We want to sell, but where am I going to go?
Right. So I've got a condition. I don't want to move forward, Julie. I want to sell my house, but I don't want to be homeless. And so I don't want to buy one. I don't want to sell one until I know what I'm going to buy, because I'm not looking to sell my house to move under a bridge. Right.
So if I could
Right.
find you something, how will you?
Right. If I can solve that problem first, if I can help you find a house that you feel comfortable that we can place an offer on, would you feel comfortable putting your house on the market? If I can solve the problem, would you take the next step? Right. Here's another example of how this could look. If I can show you how we sell homes right now during COVID, would you list your home with me? I'm afraid to move forward right now because I am afraid of having strangers come into my house during a COVID surge. Well, guys,
Hey, Hal, I use this all the time, by the way.
Talk to me, Bruce.
I use this on a day-to-day basis. If I can do this, will you be able to do that? Because I use this with all the agents I negotiate with as well. Because if I can get you $5,000 on the home inspection, will you be able to make that deal for me? Because it doesn't lend itself as an agreement. It lends it says, if I can, I got to convince them to do this. But if I do, I should say, will you be able to do that? And I use it all the time. And it's a very, very often win-win situation, because they'll know, because I always rephrase it. I'm not saying I can, but if I can, will you be able to do that?
And Bruce, one of the things that this does, which you're levering in that conversation, it triggers something called the law of reciprocity. The law of reciprocity is a very, very basic human law. And it's a law. The human brain does not like things to be unfinished, does not like things to be unbalanced. When I do something for you, you're going to be inclined to want to do something back for me. That's just the way it is. We like balance and equilibrium in the planet. That's the way our brains are hardwired. If I was to sing happy birthday to you and get through that whole song and the very last part of it, happy birthday, dear Julia, happy birthday to, and if I stop there, some of you guys are going to punch me because it's got to get resolved. And so the law of reciprocity is something that we're looking to leverage to our advantages as often as we can. If I can do something to you, Bruce, you're spot on. I'm not committing that I can, but if I can, will you commit to return the favor? This is powerful. If I can show you how we can get more money for you than for your home than you can get on your own, would you meet with me for 15 minutes?
Yeah,
Guys,
Hal, that's what I always teach too. I teach right to my team. If I can show you a way to get your property sold for more money and it covers my commission, will you meet with me for 15 minutes?
simple, right? If I
Simple as that.
can, will
One
you?
of the biggest things I try to teach, and it's often underutilized and often not used.
And guys, what we have to do, here's the deal. We have to learn this rule. We know this rule works, but we can't just rely on trying to memorize it in real time and just make it up on the fly. We've got to have an if I can, will you statement already prepared for a meeting. If I can show you how we can do this better than you can, would you meet for 15 minutes? If I can show you how if I can get you this $5,000 off, will you move forward? We've got to kind of have what would be my if I can, will you statement for a million different contexts and just have them practiced and rehearsed and ready to go. So in that moment, you can pull it right off the shelf and it just flows naturally and you don't have to think about it.
Yes,
Because-
Hall, also I have an example.
Go.
If I can spend, example, I will say to seller, $20,000 staging your house, would you reimburse that money? Cover the cost once the house is sold? Can I pick as
if I can
example?
front the money up front, would you reimburse it?
Right.
Guys, don't think that that's not the business model of Compass. One of the things that Compass, the big tech disruptor, is doing right now is they're offering to front the repair costs because they've got the investors who can make that money available on a front end lend. We'll do the $25,000 worth of repairs on the front end if you reimburse us on the back end at closing, right? It's the law of reciprocity triggered big time. And so, Julia, I love it. If I can put that money out, put my words where and my money where my mouth is, because I don't get reimbursed unless we close, right? So if I can do this, would you do that? Leverage the law of reciprocity. Really, really, really powerful. Any other questions or thoughts around this one before we move on? If I can show you the next 5, would you be willing to hang with me for 20 more minutes? There you go. I practiced that one just for you guys. All right, here we go.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I also have another example. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. You decide. So if I can cover the cost for the inspections, either it's lead-based paint, mold, asbestos, whatever they need to inspect on the house, the buyers, right? If I would cover the cost for them, would you be able to reimburse me for that? Also for the seller, because the seller or whoever who's going to have to pay for that, would they be able to reimburse me for that? Would that be the case?
Again, you'd have to kind of think about how that would work and the logistics of how that reimbursement would work. One of the things that if I can, that you want to avoid, for example, is anything that would trigger a marketing violation. If I can pay for a home warranty, would you list with me? That would be a violation of marketing rules, right? But if I can reimburse, would you? That's something, think about that, Julie. Talk to your broker about how you'd handle that. But I think the idea is a good one. What can I commit to doing that would cause you to want to commit back to me?
Right. Like, yeah, I got it.
Now, here's another one that I like, because I bet you guys are all a bit like me. Julie's like, don't bet on it. I see your laugh. How would we use this? I bet you're a little bit like me. How could we use this one? Let's think
Example, you can say, I bet you are a bit like me of saving money for the purchase, that you're looking for the best deal and the best quality. Means the same way, something like that, related to that.
You're right in the ballpark, right? Frequently what it does is it creates mutual agreement, as long as we're reasonable in what they're asking them to be like me about. So I'll give you an example, and let's play with this one. Let's say we've got somebody who's a little bit reluctant to pay our full commission. You know what? Your 6% fee is a little bit pricey. Other people have said they do it for 5 or 4. I bet you're a little bit like me. You'd be willing to spend a little bit more to get the very best quality product, right? What happens is, I bet you're a little bit like me, is a chance for them to start to get some mutual agreement going, as long as the follow-up is something that is reasonable. I bet you're a little bit like me. You'd be willing to pay an agent 12% to list your home. No, they won't. But I bet you're like me. I bet you're willing to spend a little bit more to get quality. Isn't that true? And to try to get buy-in, right? And that allows them to kind of grease the skids. How else could you use this in a real estate setting? I bet you're a little bit like me.
I have said, I bet you're like me and you appreciate someone who works efficiently.
I love it. I bet you're a little bit like me and you appreciate someone who works efficiently. And the follow-up statement is one that plays right into what you want them to agree to. I bet you're a little bit like me, Allison, and you appreciate the fact that we've got a well-qualified team with people who can handle each aspect of this transaction flawlessly. And if I was going up against a really great team, not the Stacey Esther team, but if I was going up a great team, I would say something like, I bet you're really a little bit like me. I bet you enjoy it when you're working with a solo agent so you don't get handed off from person to person to person. You can use this whatever way you need to, right? But I love the way you just did. Anybody else have some ideas of how you'd use this one? I bet you're a little bit like me.
Hal, I always use this with, I bet you're a little bit like me where you like to save the most money you can on a big transaction. Well,
Right.
I understand that. And it's often overlooked that you pay for what you get. And what I'm describing to you is getting top-notch value like a Ferrari for a price of a Honda.
You know, and Bruce, you know, we're going to go back to conjunction junction here with you. You just used a word there to link those two things. The way you do that is you use the conjunction and. Guys, if you were in my affirmation class a few weeks ago, we talked about how to link affirmations and get the power from one to move into the power of the second. When you can get agreement, hey, Bruce, I bet you're a little bit like me and you're looking to save a lot of money on a big transaction. Yeah, Bruce, we are alike. And I bet you also are willing to pay for quality. The word "and" takes the truthiness, right? To quote some of our, which one of the TV guys at late night coined truthiness? I don't remember who that was. It was one of the late night hosts. But the idea of Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert is the guy who coined truthiness. It takes the truthiness for, yeah, I do like to save money and I'm willing to pay for quality. Right? So I bet you're a little bit like me. Using the linking word "and" can kind of get people to buy into what on their face might seem like contradictory things. I like to save money. I don't want to pay a lot for quality, but the way that Bruce just described it with the word "and" links those two just right, which is why Bruce has such a big business, in part.
Can I ask a
question? Please, Eve, jump in.
Are we trying to create like a psychology of shared values? And so that we don't, I'm not your adversary. I'm not different than you. We share commonality. And then we can move towards a mutually agreeable objective.
Yep, that's exactly what we're doing. I bet you're a little bit like me, puts you and I, Eve, on the same side of the fence. We're not adversaries. We've got a lot in common. Right?
Right. I have to, yes, right. And especially, I know this has been used on me too when I buy something, etc. But it works. It works. You want to like the other person. You want to feel they're on your side. They have the same values. They want the same thing for you.
Right.
Even though they do have a different objective or agenda slightly, but they're not out to just screw you, excuse me.
Right.
But
which is the bias that they have, right? We already said, what are the real estate or the salespeople biases? You're out to kind of take advantage of me.
Right.
This gets people on the same side. Again, the trick is you got to be reasonable. The trick also, to some extent, is in your delivery. If you come off used car salesman-ish with this, it's not going to work, right? A lot of what we practice in Script and Language Lab is the delivery. I bet you're a little bit like me is a great one. How about number 5? Just imagine. Anybody show homes use this phrase at all while you're touring a home?
Yeah.
Give me some example.
Just imagine living in this beautiful house with your family and making it your forever home.
All right, I love it. What else? How else are people using this phrase?
Just imagine quarantining here.
Yeah. Just imagine spending the rest of COVID in this beautiful, spacious 6,000-foot home. All right.
Just imagine to spend the rest of your life in this house.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing that we recognize, right? Is that people make decisions based on the imagery in their mind. We have to recognize that we have to see it before we can act on it. We are very image people. In one of the very first sessions months ago, when we started this exercise of scripts and language, we talked about creating pictures and telling stories. And we get to kind of direct what stories we implant for them to see. People make decisions based on the images they see in their mind. You get to place those images. And so it allows the person to have their own creative mental imagery pull in the direction that you want them to go. We want them to see themselves here in this home, right? I had a conversation with someone this morning, early before we started classes, about 8 o'clock, who had a buyer who was getting cold feet. They made an offer over the weekend, and they made a good offer. It was a multiple bid offer, and they won. And they were going to attorney review, and they're starting to get cold feet. Anybody have that happen before? If you haven't, get used to it, right, Ash? Because it happens again and again. But what we started to do is we started to say, look, they're getting caught up in the moment, right? Because there's some real concerns in the moment about the money. And while they have a job and they're in this industry where things look like things are going to stay stable and it looks like there's going to be smooth sailing, they're panicking. And what we encouraged was a conversation that said, just imagine, here's the phrase that we used, that we came up with. Just imagine how you feel, and that 6 shouldn't be there. Just imagine how you feel the next holiday season. Just imagine how you feel next Christmas. When all of this is going to be behind you, you're going to be able to celebrate in your brand new home. What we're doing is we're inviting them into that image of things being calmer and things being stable and actually having a family gathering around the Christmas tree in the new home. How does that feel? Once we get a positive feeling, emotion attached to that, now we're going to use that emotion to carry us through this short-term hiccup, this short-term discomfort, right? Just imagine is a great, great thing. We get them to imagine the situation where the problem is gone. You know, some of you guys know, as a psychotherapist, before I got into real estate, people tell me all the time, my therapist friends laugh at me and they say, I can't believe you're not doing therapy anymore. I'm like, oh, you have never sold a house. Are you kidding me? But this is kind of a variation on what we used to use in the psychotherapy world that we call the miracle question. What happens sometimes when people get stuck is that they can't envision a better future anymore. What happens when people get stuck in a bad place in a relationship is they can't envision what it would look like if this relationship was better. And the miracle question was, just imagine that you woke up in the morning and this relationship was exactly what you wanted it to be. How would you know? What would be different? What would you notice different about that person? We get them to imagine what it would look like if things were different. It frees up all that emotional energy. What this does is it imports that idea right into a decision. Just imagine living in this home. Picture it. Feel the emotion. That's what great staging does, is it invites people to imagine, right? To imagine being there, taking part in that, feeling what that feels like. Just imagine how you feel. And as a follow-up, I got a text while I was teaching Ignite from the agent who we were talking to this morning, and the buyer stayed in the deal. Just acknowledge by using this phrase, just imagine being in the home next holiday season and how it's going to feel for you and your family. They were able to say, yeah, you're right. These next few weeks are a little bit scary to me, but I think we can get through it. And they're still in the deal, right? Just imagine is powerful. Anybody else have some ideas about just imagine before we move on? This is the tribute to John Lennon. I love this one. There's 2 types of people in the world. Now, we live in a very polarized world in lots of different ways, right? And this is one that's, what happens is when we acknowledge that there's 2 types of people, it forces people to decide, which type am I? And we can use this as a way of stacking the deck, as we did before, into a direction that we want them to go. Has anybody used this in a real estate related context, or could think of how you'd use this phrase to steer people into a decision that you want them to make in a real estate context? Love somebody to take a shot at this.
The
Hal, the easiest one is there's two types of people in this world, decision makers and non-decision makers. Which one are you?
Love it. Because when you set it up, there's two type of people. I got to be one. Nobody wants to see themselves as a non-decision maker. We want to see ourselves as proactive agents in control of our lives, rational, fair, all those things. So you stack the deck into seeing themselves as a decision maker, which means, guess what? You got to make a decision, don't you? How about this? My experience, there's two types of people in the world. Those who price their homes accurately and sell it for top dollar, and those who price it too high and lose a lot of money. Which one are you?
I have another one, Hal.
Go ahead.
Two types of people in the world: people that that are gamblers and people that are not. Using that in the context of, this is the market that we know. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. It could be a gamble to wait and not list your house and not know what that market's going to look like. In that kind of context is where.
Yeah, I love it. And that's kind of context that says, let's talk about getting on the market now and not waiting to a future that we don't know.
Right.
If you really want to amp it up, you could go Clint Eastwood at the end. There's two kinds of people in the world. There's gamblers and there's not gamblers. Do you feel lucky, punk? Right? You could go Clint there if you want to. Anybody else use this one or have any ideas of how you could? I love that one, Julia, because it really does. We don't know what the future is going to hold, right? We don't. All right, I got two more for you. Most people. And so here's the thing about most people. People take comfort in knowing that other people have done something before and that it's turned out okay. People really don't like to be the first person to try anything, right? Remember the Life commercial with Mikey? Let's make Mikey try it. He hates everything, right? Nobody wants to be the cardiac surgeon's very first bypass operation. People want to know that you've done this before, that other people have done it before, and it's worked out well. And when you can use the phrase most people as a way of saying there's this whole body of evidence that we have that shows how this can turn out, it starts to reduce resistance and fear. One of the biggest things that leads to rejection is fear-based objections. It builds safety through social proof. I'll give you an example. And this has to do with getting someone to sign a buyer's agency agreement. I don't know if I want to commit to you, Hal. Well, you know what? What most people do is they sign the buyer's agency agreement for 30 days just to try us out, and then they extend it if we need to in the future. But what it does is it gives a context. It says most people do it this way. This is the way that is expected. What people hear in their unconscious is, gee, if that's the way that most people do it, I'm probably would be wise to do it that way, right? Most people. Who's used this one before? And talk to me about how you've used this one. Or how you could.
Well, what about one way of presenting? I mean, most people who have taken our advice, followed what our suggestions, and have put their trust in us have come out with a positive outcome.
Yeah. Most people hire the stager because it turns out better for them, right?
Yeah.
There's something to be said for social proof, guys. I was just shopping last night for holiday gifts. Now, here's something crazy. My daughter, you're getting old. When your daughter asks for Christmas, I said, what do you want for Christmas? She says, I want a Roomba vacuum cleaner. I'm like, what? You want a what? That's not my kid wants a vacuum cleaner for Christmas. You've got to be kidding me. I must really be old. And so I'm out looking at Roombas. First of all, what the heck? These guys are expensive. But I found two different models, $30 apart. One of them for $199 with 4,000 positive reviews, and one for $239 with 27,000 positive reviews. Which one do you think I spent the extra money on? I was willing to spend $30 more because there's 25,000 more positive reviews. Most people find that this is a good value. Huge power in that, right? And so what you start to think about is where are going to be the natural pinch points? Where are going to be the places where I expect to get pushback? And how can I have a most people statement ready for it? Most people sign the buyer's agency agreement for 30 days to try us out. Most people fill out the paperwork on this visit, and then we come back a second time and handle all the details of the stager and all that sort of stuff. Most people, whatever it is, wherever you expect to get some pushback, have a most people statement ready to go. We good? Ready for number 8? All right, here we go. Number 8. And guys, there's a lot more in here. Let me just hold on for a second. Let me get my Kindle open here. Because if you really dive into this book, and I'd recommend that you get it, there's quite a number of different books on language and neurolinguistics. I just like this because it's super easy. There's 23 of them. I'm only giving you 8. There's 23 of them in here. Here's the last one. I'm guessing that you haven't gotten around to. Now, this one, sometimes people say, I'm not sure that I want to do that. I'm not sure I want to let people off the hook. As a coach, I probably wouldn't say to someone, I'm guessing you haven't gotten around to making your calls this week, have you? Right? I'm not. Because what I'm trying to do as a coach is create a little discomfort around not making your calls if I'm coaching you. But here's the thing. What this does is it allows a person to save face and avoid making excuses and lying to you outright if they didn't complete the task. And guys, here's where this can come into play. If we think about pipeline management, what is pipeline management? Pipeline management, when we get a lead, and let's call it an opportunity, because that's the language of command right now. We're calling someone who raises their hand, has a need to buy or sell or invest an opportunity. What we know is that we can't always be closing. Jeb Blunt, one of the great trainers, sales trainers of all time, probably owns 8 books on my shelf back there. In Fanatical Prospecting, probably one of the very best prospecting books in the world, says that always be closing is BS. It's bad sales. It's a beginner's strategy. It's not BS that you guys were thinking, oh, this is a family show. But it's what we do is when we close too quickly, we become the stereotyped used car salesman that everyone hates. No one asks to get married on a first date, I hope. That's weird. That's creepy. We just don't do that. We ask for what's the next normal thing that somebody would ask for? A second date, right? What we do need to do is we need to get micro commitments all along the way to what's the next step that you would logically take. That's not too big a step, but it keeps you in motion because pipelines require movement. So many sales professionals in all different industries believe that they have a sales pipeline, and what they have is a big group of names, but nobody is committing to take the next step. And what that becomes then is not a flowing river, it becomes a cesspool. And we need to get people, as we're managing our pipelines, to say, what's the next step you would take? And when we follow up, we check in. And sometimes if we think that they maybe didn't do it, if we think that the relationship is new enough and fragile enough that I don't want to blow them out of the water by beating them on the head for not doing the next thing, we can open with something like this. I'm guessing you haven't gotten around to. And it could sound something like this. I'm guessing you didn't get a chance to call the decluttering company about giving you an estimate yet. Right? It gives them a chance to save face, gets them off the griddle. If they have done it, they're going to say, oh, no. Let me tell you, I absolutely did do that. I'll show you. I called them. They came in. They said, this is what's it cost. We're going to make that next step. If they didn't do it, here's what they're going to say. Yeah, you're right. You know what? I thought I'd have time, but we got so backed up with the holidays, and then my sister got COVID, and there's been so many things going on. It just became a back burner issue. And it gives us an opportunity to go back and recalibrate for a smaller step that keeps them in movement, keeps them in motion. I'm guessing you haven't gotten around to is a great, great statement. How else could you use this? Anybody else using this one? How's Stacy using this? For those that say Stacy uses this in real estate and life.
You can use it on either signing a exclusive buyer's agreement or signing a listing agreement.
I'm guessing you haven't gotten around to filling out the paperwork yet, huh? Okay. You know what, Allison? We haven't. And then the follow-up is, okay, what can we do to take a step towards that? What can we do today to make that happen? Right? in the beginning, when we don't have rapport in relationship, we've got to preserve the relationship by allowing people to save face if they don't take the step, if we miscalibrated the step, right? This is a really, really good one. Okay, I had 8. There's lots of them in here. I'm going to encourage you to go get this book. And again, to me, having these phrases memorized, for those of you that and you spend any time on Facebook with me, you know I like to cook. And it's kind of like having ingredients in the shelf. You know, you go to the spice rack and you have different things for different purposes. These phrases are things that we learn, that we think about, how would I use this phrase in a real estate related context? We create the statement and we practice it so that it's just practice. It's right there. It's top of mind. It's top of mouth. Right. In the beginning of the scripts lab, I showed a video of Jim Parsons. Everybody know Jim Parsons, right? The actor from The Big Bang Theory. And here's what I love about Jim. He's this guy from Texas. He ain't no scientist. And he's got to learn some of the most scientific language and have it flow as naturally as if it was anything else. And so what he does is he just practices it. He practices, and what he says is these words have to kind of get into his palate. It's one thing to think it. It's another thing to say it. You say it out loud again and again and again until it just flows naturally. And what we do with these phrases is we think about these phrases. We think about how we'd use them in a real estate related context. We write them out and we say them again and again and again so that they're there on immediate recall when we need them in a real estate conversation. When you do this, this is how you improv. It's not necessarily about memorizing every single line of the communication because the other guy doesn't have the script. But when you learn these catchphrases and you can just kind of roll with them in a natural way, now you're onto something. Now you have natural, powerful communication where people make decisions and get things done. Power of scripts, knowledge is knowing what to say. Wisdom is knowing when to say it. We got 2 minutes left. We're going to wrap up here. But if you've been in classes with me, you know that I always like to ask with a little bit of a recap. Any ahas today? Any of these phrases that resonate with you more than others that you could see yourself using? Or some that you could say, I don't know if I could use that one. I'm looking for 2 or 3 pieces of feedback, 2 or 3 ahas.
I think about the I'm guessing you didn't get around to, and wondering, you know, if it, for me, it creates Catholic schoolgirl guilt, you know, and can it also make someone shut down rather than, you know, give them an
it could. It could. And so you're going to have to kind of play it by ear and see. Here's the thing, though. Guilt is a powerful thing. It was one of the best things Sigmund Freud ever invented. Because what it does is it creates discomfort. And guys, we have to be willing to do a couple things to be effective in this business. I said before, we have to surrender to the fact that we are professional interrupters. We've got to be willing to interrupt people. And we have to be willing to cause discomfort with the status quo if we're going to try to get people to make a decision and get into action. I'll share this quote. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I'm going to go back to graduate school. When I was at NYU studying family therapy, and one of my professors had said, the job of a clinician is to comfort people, truly comfort people when they're distressed, comfort them when they're disturbed. But she says, sometimes the job of a clinician is to disturb people who've become too comfortable. And that stuck with me. And I think there's a place for that in sales. We have to be able to use these triggers sometimes, Lorraine, to create a little discomfort with the status quo if our job is to try to influence action. And if it's too much and if it becomes damaging and it causes them to shut down, then we modify the approach, right? But you got to be willing to kind of poke people a little bit sometimes.
Well, I think it would be great, to follow it up with. But I'd be willing to do this if you would be willing.
If I can do this, would you be willing to do that?
Right.
Right.
Powerful.